Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? We're back to wrap up this ridiculous storyline in Mighty Thor number 366 by Walt Simonson, where he decided that he needed Thor to be a frog for 3 issues. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's kind of the crux of it. And I still love the fact that his editors were still down with basically whatever Walt wanted to do, I think. Which, I've said before, but probably goes to show just how much Walt managed to turn this title around during his tenure on it. So what's been going on in this is that in the wake of Ragnarok, like from what I can tell, straight up Ragnarok, where Thor, I believe, fought Surt and lost, and then Surt went on to fight Odin. Odin defeated Surtur, but afterwards disappeared, and all sorts of shenanigans have kind of spun off from that. For one thing, Surtur's sword was left behind when he was defeated, and it's this gigantic magical sword. And it turns out that Loki has been siphoning energy off of that. This is something that hasn't come up in the last couple of issues. I think it's just because if you've been reading Thor at the time, you're supposed to already know this. I picked it up at the wrong time. But with Odin having disappeared, there's a vacancy on the throne of Asgard. And Loki, of course, has designs on acquiring the throne. So with these extra magical energies, he came up with a spell, transformed Thor into a frog, and had him transported back to Earth. So we got a couple of issues of the adventures of Thor the Frog in his war with other frogs versus New York City rats. And the reason Loki decided to turn Thor into a frog at this time, of course, was to get him out of the way, because there's going to have to be an election about who's going to be the next ruler of Asgard. So in the meantime, Loki's been putting forth his case towards all the denizens of Asgard. There was a bit where a fake Thor came down and kind of muddied up the proceedings, because if Thor's there, he's the obvious choice for who should be Odin's successor. So Loki has found out who the fake Thor is and is going to try and see what he can do to turn that to his advantage. Meanwhile, Thor wrapped up his War of the Frogs and found Mjolnir. And we got a couple of great pages where a frog tried to lift Thor's hammer, but he was successful, and he managed to turn into this essentially, which is, as they say, a 6'6" fighting mad frog. So the Frog of Thunder is on the scene, and he's ready to go back to Asgard and beat Loki into reversing the spell. So we're all caught up. Let's get into the issue. We can start with the cover here. That's pretty great. That's a little tough to beat. And if you want to try and encourage kids to buy a comic, just intrigue them, I think you could do a lot worse than that. I remember seeing this in Wizard, in the price guide every once in a while, they do like an example issue or whatever. And this particular cover came up, and you see that. And if you haven't been reading it, you're like, man, some crazy shit went down to Thor back in the day, didn't it? But, gigantic shot of Frog Thor. We got all that Walt Simonson, kind of Kirby-esque energy crackle flying out around him. They even alter the corner box, which I appreciated. This is off of the last page of issue 365 when he does his transformation into Frog Thor. So let's get into this. All right, so this is going to be as expected, written and drawn by Walter Simonson, both pencils and inks. I think I've seen like 4 different versions of Walt Simonson's style. We first took a look at Cyberforce number 0 way back in the day, which is more representative of his current style, where he doesn't go very heavy with like differences in line weight. It still looks kind of fast, and it's still very skilled, but I don't know, there's something about it that doesn't quite have the same charm as his old stuff. My favorite version of Walter Simonson is on Fantastic Four, where it didn't seem like he was trying to race through the pages quite as much. He was taking a little bit of extra time, maybe to draw all of that crazy Walt Simonson-esque tech, thinking a little bit more about compositions, and I think it's the best representation of his particular style. We also saw him on X Factor, where it wasn't a comic he was writing, and I don't think he was particularly invested in the characters, and he was getting near the end of his run when we were taking a look at Inferno. And that stuff, it still looks good, but it's very rushed. I think he's running behind on deadlines, and I think he's just about done with that book at the time. So it's fun, but it's not the best version of Walt. This, I think, is somewhere in between like X Factor and Fantastic Four in terms of he's trying to go fast because he's doing everything on this book, but he also cares a lot about the book, and he wants to make sure it looks good. So we're going to get a few interesting compositions, and he's going to spend a little bit of extra time on his line work and just making sure everything looks clean. So we're going to start things out with Thor racing towards Asgard on his chariot drawn by the 2 goats, which is how Thor's chariot is drawn in Norse mythology. Great heroic shot, coming in at an angle, take up the whole page. Walt likes to do splash, double splash when he's opening up a comic. He's not quite going to do that in this. I think maybe he's got a little bit too much story he wants to focus on, and he wants to save up his splash pages for later on in the issue. But great opener, got a bunch of speed lines, got a bunch of Kirby crackle, and got a frog in a Thor outfit. Like, how can you go wrong? And yeah, we got him racing through the cosmos, heading for Asgard, and he has to get there on his goat chariot because the bridge linking Asgard to Midgard has been destroyed in the battle with Surtur. Okay, so from there we're going to cut to Loki, who is basically just going to catch us up on what his role has been in trying to elect a new ruler for Asgard. So he's talking to somebody here who's going to remain in shadow, and they're not going to be revealed for the rest of the issue. We're not sure exactly who this is, whether this is a prisoner of Loki or an ally. It seems a bit more likely to be an ally. But he explains that he's discovered the ruse that Heimdall presented, where he presented the fake Thor. It's some other god who looks an awful lot like Thor. And he explains how he's got some kind of magical spell that he cast on the fake Thor's hammer. So obviously Thor is the only one who's supposed to be able to lift Mjolnir, based on the fact that he's the only one who's worthy. So Loki's going to pull some kind of dirty trick on that to turn things around and sway the crowd in his favor. From there, we're going to cut to a different part of Asgard. So we're going to actually check in on Volstagg, one of Thor's warrior buddies. Volstagg's down in the dumps because his daughter is deathly ill. And actually, all of the kids are who discovered Surtur's sword. Of course, they can't find Surtur's sword because there's been an enchantment cast over it so that it's rendered invisible unless you're basically right on top of it. I'm not particularly fond of Volstagg's appearance in this. I know this is just kind of what he looks like in the, at least in the earlier comics. I imagine this probably got retconned at some point. But he is a goofy looking character. I mean, I guess that's kind of the point. So anyway, Volstagg has decided that he's got to do something about what's going on with his daughter. He doesn't know where the sword is. She does, but she can't move. So what he's going to do is he's going to strap her to his chest in a little baby carrier thing. And he's going to walk out to where the kids found Surtur's sword and have her pointed out to him. His wife is pretty pissed off about this, but he figures, it doesn't matter. I mean, chances are I'm just going to go out there and die anyway, so it'll be fine. From there, we cut back to the arena where the All Thing is being held to elect the new ruler of Asgard. We've got our two candidates here, Loki and what the crowd presumes to be Thor. And Loki's going to go first, and he's going to kind of put out his argument for why he should be ruler. And he's going to talk about the end of Ragnarok, the big battle that went down. And Loki's going to start by going, okay, so I know you guys all think I'm an asshole. I do trickstery things, and I kind of ruin everybody's lives. I'm sorry. We've all got our roles to play in Asgard here. This one's mine. I don't complain about it that much. But when Ragnarok came down, when Surtur was laying waste to Asgard, I was the one who stood between him and the Eternal Flame, which he did. That happened at the end of the Ragnarok and Roll storyline. He did it in a snarky, trickster god kind of way, but he did do that. And he's going to say that my standing up to Surtur made me worthy to be the next ruler. And here, let me prove it. And he snatches the hammer away from fake Thor and goes, check it. I'm worthy to lift the hammer. That makes me just as good a candidate as Thor. Only I'm better at talking and I don't piss off to Earth nearly as often. And the Asgardians are all shocked because nobody can lift Mjolnir except for Thor. Like even Balder couldn't lift Mjolnir. And he does some great Walt Simonson twirling of the hammer over his head. And meanwhile, fake Thor in the background here is like, oh shit. He obviously knows I'm not Thor, and I can't do shit about it, or else I'm going to reveal myself. So Loki's going to hurl Mjolnir away so that it can return back to him, just so he can show off, I have the powers of Thor. And while it speeds away, he's like, holy shit, I did it. All these years I've been scheming, and I finally came up with a scheme good enough to steal the throne of Asgard. This is kind of great. So where's that hammer anyway? Takes a closer look as actual Thor in frog form descends on the arena and specifically on Loki with a pretty great shot. He's all speed lines and flying cape, and he doesn't stop to address the crowd or anything. He's not going to let on what's happened to him. He's just going to snatch up Loki and go flying off again. Look how great that looks. The big swoop as he flies away with him. There's a bit of pretty thick brush stuff going on in here. Walt always does these kind of flight paths just awesome. So the crowd figures that some kind of demon must have kidnapped Loki just now, and they all got to rush out to try and find him. Meanwhile, fake Thor finds Heimdall and goes, yo, dude, I think it's about time we ended this. This is kind of as opportune a moment as we're going to find to like slip away. So I'm just going to get rid of the wig and hope that nobody sees this. And yeah, we get all the Asgardians riding out. Meanwhile, down in, I think this is in Muspelheim, Curse is complaining about a forthcoming plot line. So he's looking for somebody called Malekith. Hela's telling him to calm down and thinking about how she's going to have to take down Thor soon herself. So yeah, just setting up some stuff for the next few issues. Awesome shot of Curse, super strong pose, just ripping apart something. Like takes up almost the entire page, goes over the panel border and behind Hela here, which is great. And yeah, so this is mostly referring to events in issue 363, which was just before we picked up on our Thor run here. All right, so not too far beyond the edge of the rebuilt city of Asgard, Thor deposits Loki a little aggressively, and Loki thinks that this is hilarious. I'm sure he thought he was going to see Thor again at some point. He figured he would be in frog form. He didn't think he'd be in costume, though. And he's like, this is absolutely fine. I mean, you can't exactly ascend the throne looking like this. They're not going to think you're you. And he's just aggravating Thor. Thor's taking swipes at him with Mjolnir, knocking him off his feet. Get a great comedy shot of Loki looking between his feet here. And Thor's going to yell at him to, reverse the incantation. Turn me back into a man. And Loki's like, you know what? I don't think I even could. I cast a spell, wasn't even thinking about reversing it one day. I think you're kind of stuck like this. And to be honest, I think it's an improvement. In fact, I think we need to make you more frog-like. And yeah, he casts some spell stuff, like nice interwoven, Norse pattern stuff going on in here. Didn't even notice that at first. Blasts Thor with it, and this is going to bring about more of an animalistic nature in him. So yeah, we're actually going to get the Frog Thor versus Loki fight that we probably wondered if that, this was going to happen when this whole storyline started up. And Thor keeps swinging away at Loki, and he loses the ability to talk because, like I said, he's becoming more animalistic. And soon he's getting to the point where he loses the ability to think coherently. And Loki realizes, oh, wait a minute, this was a bad idea. Because now I've provoked what's essentially, a backed-in-a-corner animal that has the power of Thor and is already swinging on me and seems to think it's a good idea to continue. So it seems as though Loki actually doesn't have a way to reverse the spell, so he's actually kind of put himself in a perilous position here. And this is just great stuff with them facing off on each other, and Thor just keeps coming, keeps swinging. All right, so from there we cut back to Volstagg, who's trekking along the land with his little baby front pack, trying to find this sword of Surtur before something awful happens to his daughter. And he does stumble across it. And we get this great shot of, the gigantic sword lying off in the distance here, hooked up to some kind of machinery that's siphoning off energy. But the perspective here is, it's interesting because it's very good in indicating the size of the sword, but he also hid the outside line of it here, which would have given a better, a more precise indication of just how the perspective on that thing worked. I think that was probably a little bit of just maybe not happy accident. I mean, Walt did design this machine. I'm sure he could have come up with a perspective on the sword just fine, but by placing the machine right here, he doesn't have to. So we get the feeling of the size of the sword without actually having to see it. All right, so having gotten in close proximity of the sword, Volstagg is starting to feel the effects that the kids were, where they all started to fall sick. So he's starting to get dizzy, and he's starting to lose his strength. And I mean, Volstagg's whole thing is his strength. He goes to lean against this rock formation to try and support himself, but of course, he's Volstagg the Voluminous, and no rock formation can stand against him. So just even leaning against this thing starts an avalanche as the rocks start coming down, and John Workman goes to work. And all the rocks, they all start gathering steam. They find rock buddies. They all come along for the ride. And it all crashes down on top of the machine that's siphoning off the energy from the sword, which, of course, is what's fueling Loki's spells. Fun Splash feels like a bit of an easy one for Walt. Like, these all feel like textures that he's well acquainted with, and he doesn't have to think too much about how to fill the space. Like, for the rocks here, or, for this Kirby-esque tech, this is all stuff he's familiar with. Same with all these flames. So while it is a fun splash, I don't think this particular page took him particularly long. I've got an ad for that. G.I. Joe Yearbook number 2 with the Michael Golden story, complete with cover, pinups, all that kind of shit. And I went over that quite a few months ago now, I guess. That was a fun time. I don't have too many Michael Golden comics. I do like to go over those when I can. So with the machine broken, Loki is no longer able to maintain the spells that he's been using up to this point. So all of a sudden, that feeling he had, the sickness, the weakness, all that, Volstagg is no longer feeling that. All the symptoms have immediately disappeared. Same with for his daughter. There's no recuperation period or anything. They're just, oh, we're all better all of a sudden because it's a spell. You can totally do that. And, they get a big hug in, and Volstagg is like, hey, it worked. Your mom might actually let me sleep in the house tonight, which is fun stuff. Meanwhile, back at the battle between Thor and Loki. Loki is, you get the feeling he was like just minutes away from getting splattered all over the rocks. The Thor frog gets bathed in light, and with all of Loki's spells ended, that includes the spell that turned Thor into a frog. So he transforms back into his usual form, complete with face mask, because he got horribly wounded, apparently, when he went down into the underworld to deal with Hela. In a storyline we probably won't hit, but, never say never. And Thor's ready to pick up where they left off with Loki. And Loki's like, hey, what's the problem? I took off the spell. Isn't that what you wanted? And Thor figures that, you probably didn't take off the spell, just the spell wore off or it broke or something. But he doesn't know what the deal is with the sword, so he can't back that up in any way. It's just, from experience dealing with Loki. Loki's like, nah, dog. Seeing in that frog body, it turned something in my heart. It grew 3 sizes or some shit. So I called off my enchantment so that we could, embrace as brothers once more. And Thor, of course, suspects that is not the case, but again, he doesn't have any way to verify. And at that point, Heimdall rides up with the other Asgardians close behind him. So with the real Thor in attendance with the other Asgardians, you got to figure now that Loki's plans to take the throne of Asgard are, pretty much out the window at this point. But he still figures he can somehow turn this in his favor. So he's going to start talking with the Asgardians. That's his main power. And that's when Thor tosses him Mjolnir. I guess Thor saw him steal the fake Mjolnir from the fake Thor and had an idea of what he was trying to pull there. So it's like, here, you seem to have no problem lifting this before. If you really want to capture their attention, here, wield it again. And of course, Loki can't even begin to lift it, and it completely knocks him down. So the Asgardians are all confused. Something seems to have happened to Loki to take away his worthiness. And hey, what happened to that frog demon we saw earlier? And Thor's like, no. I drove off the frog demon for now, but it seems to have somehow contaminated Loki. Like, it was obviously all full of, illness and shit. And just his getting close to it contaminated him enough that he no longer had the strength to lift Mjolnir. So we all got to feel sorry for Loki going forward. Which is fun shit. This is all great classic Norse mythology stuff. Everything from Thor getting transformed into a frog, Loki having schemes for power that, get dashed. And then at the end of it, there's still animosity, but it's kind of a good-natured animosity. Because ultimately, nothing too bad happened as a result of it, at least this time. So Thor addresses the Asgardian crowd. First, he decides he has to prove that it's him, so he's got this little shroud over his mouth, because that's hiding the horrible injuries he sustained when in battle with Hela. And they go, holy shit, that's what a true hero looks like. Fucked up. And Thor states his credentials, which everybody knows, but, it's always a good thing at this point, in this kind of all-thing election sort of event, to just remind everybody exactly who you are. And he's like, I appreciate you guys all thinking I'm worthy of the throne. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. The problem is, though, that I'm not usually here. I'm actually down on Earth more often than not, fixing shit down with the mortals. So I don't think I can be an effective ruler. And in fact, I don't think we've actually had very good candidates up until now. Who should be ruler is Balder. So he suggests they all go and reconvene the Great All-Thing and present Balder to the lawgiver as future ruler of the realm. And of course, everybody agrees and, hurrahs all around. Loki's like, you're aware that we haven't seen Balder in a while, right? Because Balder is off in his own miniseries at this point, apparently. But Hogun figures he can track Balder down. And in the meantime, Loki has been momentarily forestalled, but he still has other schemes that he can present. And he's got that ally that he's got waiting in the wings. I'm sure that will become a more present option very shortly. And yeah, that's going to do it for the epic saga of the Frog of Thunder. So that is a fun 3 issues. It's a weird 3 issues. I do love that it exists, and I am glad that I got to check it out. It's just such a weird thing to devote 66 pages to. So anyway, this issue wouldn't be the end of Walt Simonson writing Thor, but it is kind of the end of him as the writer-artist. He would pencil a couple of issues after this, not too many though, and get guys like Al Milgrom doing the inking, which, looks pretty good. But he couldn't keep up with both writing and drawing this thing. I don't know if he had another project going on at the same time, or if years of trying to be the writer-artist finally caught up to him and he needed a break. So after this, Sal Buscema is going to take over the penciling chores. I'm not a fan of Sal Buscema. I don't particularly like his style, although I will say his work on Thor might have been some of the best work I've seen from Sal Buscema. So that's something. He seems to be trying to channel the Walt Simonson energy, trying to kind of mirror some of his compositions, get the figures carrying that same dynamicism, which, you usually don't see too much from Sal. So I appreciate the effort he put into the book, at least. But really the next time we're going to see Walt acting as writer, penciler, inker is going to be towards his end of the run on the book, on Thor 379 and 380, which I do plan on hitting quite shortly. Because that's the epic battle between Thor and Jormungandr, the World Serpent, that Walt decided needed to be the most epic comic of all time, and devoted an entire issue's worth of splash pages to the fight. It's not the first time somebody wrote and drew an all-splash page issue, but it's probably the bar to which that particular kind of issue is held. Anyway, though, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button. Helps with the algorithm stuff. If you want to see more, hit subscribe. And if you really want to help out, in the description, there's a link to my Patreon. If you subscribe there, that gives you access to everything I do. So, whole bunch of videos, whole bunch of comic stuff, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions. Commissions are open. So yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.